Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you will hear timeless wisdom long held by quiet masters, which contains profound secrets to stilling the restless mind and discovering a depth of rest and clarity you may have forgotten was possible. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share a careful selection of timeless Zen stories, all glimpses into the deepest secrets of mental freedom and true emotional liberation. Each one a potent, transformative teaching designed to shift your entire relationship with stress, the clamor of endless thoughts, and the relentless pursuit of more. These teachings have been passed down through generations of masters who understood a fundamental truth most of us have lost: that genuine peace and profound understanding are not found in altering our circumstances, but in radically shifting our inner relationship to them. As the great Zen master Dogen once taught, when you find your place where you are exactly the place of the truth. Over the course of our journey, you'll discover precisely how these timeless truths can reshape your experience of life and lead you to deep repose. As we journey through these remarkable narratives, you'll notice something powerful begin to unfold. The tight grip of worry will naturally soften. The incessant hum of your thoughts will gently recede. You'll find yourself effortlessly settling into a state of profound peace and intuitive understanding. So settle in deeply now. Allow your body to fully release into whatever supports you. Take one deliberate breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you are about to receive profound teachings, whispered across centuries, now ready to be heard by you. Our first story is about the liberation found in embracing emptiness. In a bustling merchant district of Kyoto, there lived a cloth merchant named Yamada, whose mind never found rest. Despite his successful business, he lay awake each night worrying about inventory, competitors, and the countless details that seemed to multiply endlessly. His prosperity brought no peace, only more complexity and anxiety. One morning, exhausted from another sleepless night, Yamada decided to seek guidance from Master Tenzan, a renowned teacher who lived in a small temple on the outskirts of the city. The morning sun filtered through ancient pine trees as Yamada approached the simple wooden structure, his heart heavy with the burden of constant mental activity. "Master," Yamada said, bowing deeply before the elderly monk, "my business troubles keep me awake at night. My mind races with concerns about profits, losses, and endless responsibilities. How can I find peace when commerce demands such constant attention?" Master Tenzan listened patiently, his eyes twinkling with understanding. Without saying a word, he rose and walked to a corner of his simple room where various donated items were stored. He selected a piece of cloth and returned to where Yamada sat waiting. The fabric was old and worn, punctured with numerous holes of various sizes. Some holes were small, barely noticeable, while others were large enough to put a finger through. The material that remained was faded and threadbare. "I have a task for you," Master Tenzan said, placing the damaged cloth in Yamada's hands. "Take this and sell it in the marketplace." Yamada examined the worthless fabric, confusion crossing his face. "But Master, this cloth is completely worthless. It's full of holes. No one would pay anything for such damaged material. How can I possibly sell this?" Master Tenzan's expression remained serene. "Exactly. Now go and sell the holes." "Sell the holes?" Yamada repeated, certain he had misheard. "Yes. Don't try to sell the cloth. Sell the holes themselves." Yamada left the temple completely bewildered, clutching the worthless fabric. How does one sell holes? What value could emptiness possibly have? But his respect for the master compelled him to attempt this impossible task. For 3 days, Yamada wandered through the marketplace, approaching potential customers with growing desperation. "Would you like to buy some holes?" he would ask, displaying the tattered cloth. Merchants laughed at him. Customers hurried away. Children pointed and giggled. His reputation as a serious businessman began to suffer as word spread of his strange behavior. On the 4th day, something shifted in Yamada's understanding. As he sat in frustration beside a fountain, staring at the holes in the fabric, he began to laugh. The laughter started as a chuckle, but grew into deep, uncontrollable waves of joy. People gathered around him, wondering if the merchant had lost his mind. Still laughing, Yamada returned to Master Tenzin's temple. "Master," he said, his eyes bright with newfound understanding, "I finally see. I've been selling the cloth around the emptiness all along. Every garment, every piece of fabric. Its value comes from the space it creates, the emptiness it defines." The Buddha once said, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." What emerges from this story is a fundamental understanding about the relationship between substance and space, between what appears solid and what appears empty. Why do we focus so intensely on the material aspects of our lives while ignoring the spaces that give them meaning? Zen Buddhism points to our habitual tendency to grasp at things, to believe that happiness and security come from accumulating more substance, more stuff, more achievements. We become hypnotized by the threads while missing the essential emptiness that makes the cloth useful. Consider a simple cup. What makes it valuable? Not the ceramic material, but the empty space inside that can hold tea. A room's worth comes not from its walls, but from the space between them where life unfolds. Even our breathing depends on the emptiness in our lungs, the space that allows air to enter and nourish us. In our consumer culture, we're constantly encouraged to focus on acquiring more things, more experiences, more credentials. We fill our schedules, our homes, and our minds with an endless accumulation of stuff. But Yamada's revelation points to a different source of value. The spaces between things, the pauses between activities, the silence between thoughts. Zen teacher Alan Watts observed, "We cannot be more sensitive to pleasure without being more sensitive to pain. Similarly, we cannot appreciate fullness without understanding emptiness. Our obsession with filling every gap, occupying every moment, and solving every problem often prevents us from recognizing the inherent completeness that exists in spaciousness itself." This teaching applies directly to our mental and emotional lives. How much of our suffering comes from trying to fill internal voids with external substances? We attempt to satisfy spiritual emptiness with material accumulation, emotional emptiness with constant stimulation, or existential emptiness with endless busyness. But what if the emptiness itself is not a problem to be solved, but a space to be appreciated? Master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Yamada initially rejected the holes because he was thinking in terms of conventional value, rather than seeing the essential nature of emptiness and form. In meditation practice, we learn to appreciate the gaps between thoughts, the spaces between breaths, the pause between one moment and the next. These empty spaces are not voids to be filled, but opportunities for awareness to rest in its natural state. Tonight, as you notice the spaces in your experience, the silence between sounds, the gaps in your thinking, the emptiness that holds all your possessions, can you appreciate them as Yamada learned to appreciate the wholes? Can you recognize that your life's meaning might emerge not from what you've accumulated, but from the spaciousness that allows everything to exist? As the Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The space that allows one candle to exist can hold countless others without becoming crowded. Let us explore a story about the nature of perfection and imperfection. In a remote monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived a monk named Bunkai who had devoted his entire life to the sacred art of copying sutras, Buddhist scriptures. Day after day, year after year, he sat at his wooden desk with perfect posture, his brush moving across rice paper with practiced precision. The other monks considered him a master calligrapher, and visiting scholars often requested copies of his work. For 20 years, Bunkai had transcribed thousands of pages of Buddhist teachings. His characters were elegant, his spacing immaculate, and his dedication unwavering. He took great pride in preserving the Dharma through his meticulous copying, believing each stroke of his brush served the Buddha's teachings. One afternoon, while reviewing an ancient text to verify his work, Bunkai made a shocking discovery. His breath caught in his throat as he realized he had been making the same error for 2 decades. In a crucial passage that appeared in nearly every sutra he copied, he had been writing the character for doubt instead of faith. Hundreds of texts, thousands of copies, all containing this fundamental mistake. His hands trembled as he examined scroll after scroll, confirming his error again and again. How could he have been so careless? How many students had read his flawed copies? What damage had he done to the Dharma itself? Filled with shame and terror, Bunkai approached his master, the elderly abbot Teshin. He prostrated himself completely, touching his forehead to the ground. "Master, I have committed a terrible sin against the Buddha's teachings," he confessed, his voice breaking. "For 20 years, I have been copying sutras incorrectly. I have spread error instead of truth." The master listened quietly as Bunkai explained his mistake. When the confession was complete, Abbot Teshin was silent for a long moment, stroking his white beard thoughtfully. Finally, he asked a question that surprised Bunkai completely. "Tell me, which version of the sutras has helped more people in their practice?" Bunkai looked up, confused. "Master, I don't understand." "Think carefully," the master continued. "The monks who have read your versions with doubt in them, how do they approach their studies? And those who read the traditional texts with faith, what is their response?" As Bunkai reflected, a strange realization dawned on him. The monks who had studied his incorrect copies often came to him with profound questions. They wrestled with the teachings, sought deeper understanding, and engaged in lengthy philosophical discussions. They seemed to develop a more questioning, investigative approach to their practice. In contrast, those who read the standard texts with faith often simply nodded in agreement and moved on, accepting the teachings without the same depth of inquiry. "I see," Bunkai whispered, beginning to understand. The master smiled gently. "Continue your copying exactly as you have been doing." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, doubt everything, find your own light. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that what we consider mistakes may actually serve a deeper purpose in the unfolding of wisdom. Why do we become so attached to doing things correctly? Zen Buddhism reveals that our obsession with perfection often stems from ego clinging, the desire to be seen as competent, knowledgeable, and worthy of respect. We fear making mistakes because we imagine they diminish our value or disrupt some cosmic order that depends on our flawless performance. But this story illuminates a profound truth about the nature of spiritual awakening. Sometimes our greatest errors become our most valuable teachings. Bunkai's mistake created something the perfect texts could not: a spirit of inquiry, a willingness to question, and a deeper engagement with the teachings themselves. Consider how often in your own life apparent failures have led to unexpected growth. The job you didn't get that opened a better opportunity, the relationship that ended and taught you about self-worth, the illness that shifted your priorities toward what truly matters. These experiences, painful as they may have been, often serve as more powerful teachers than our successes. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Bunkai's mistake preserved a beginner's mind in those who read his texts. By encountering doubt where they expected faith, readers were forced to think rather than simply accept, to question rather than blindly follow. This teaching challenges our conventional understanding of authority and correctness. How many times do we assume that official versions, expert opinions, or traditional approaches are inherently superior to alternative perspectives? The story suggests that sometimes the unofficial, the accidental, and the imperfect may serve truth more effectively than rigid adherence to established forms. In Zen practice, we learn to hold our understanding lightly, remaining open to the possibility that our current knowledge is incomplete. This doesn't mean abandoning discernment or embracing relativism, but rather maintaining what Zen calls don't know mind, the humility to recognize that reality often exceeds our concepts about it. Tonight, as you reflect on your own perceived mistakes and imperfections, can you consider that they might be serving purposes you haven't yet recognized? Perhaps that quality you consider a flaw has helped others feel more comfortable being human around you. Maybe that failure taught you compassion for others' struggles in ways that success never could. As the Buddha taught, there are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. Sometimes our imperfect attempts to serve truth accomplish more than our perfect attempts to avoid error. Let us now turn to a tale that reveals the power of authentic simplicity. In the mountains north of Edo, there lived a sake brewer named Ichiro, whose small brewery had been in his family for generations. He took great pride in his craft, using traditional methods passed down from his grandfather to create rice wine that was once celebrated throughout the region. But times had grown difficult. Poor harvests, increased competition from larger breweries, and his own tendency towards perfectionism over profit had left Ichiro deeply in debt. He owed money to the rice suppliers, the tax collectors, the local merchants, and even his own workers. The weight of these obligations pressed on him like stones in his chest. One cold winter night, as snow fell silently outside his empty brewery. Ichiro sat alone among his vacant vats, contemplating the end of everything. His reputation was ruined. His family's legacy was destroyed, and he saw no way forward. The shame of his failure felt unbearable. He considered whether his death might at least allow his creditors to recover something from his property. As dawn broke through the frost-covered windows, Ichiro found himself walking among his empty brewing vats, like a ghost haunting his former life. In his despair, a strange impulse arose. He began filling the large ceramic vessels with clear mountain water from his well. The same pure water he had always used for brewing, but now with no rice, no koji, no fermentation, just water. When the vats were full, he painted simple wooden signs and hung them outside his brewery. Free nothing sake, guaranteed to cause no hangovers, no regrets, no false promises. Pure mountain water, honestly presented. The first visitors came out of curiosity. Word had spread through the village about Ichiro's financial troubles, and people were puzzled by his strange new offering. A few elderly villagers, remembering his family's reputation, stopped to try the nothing sake. To Ichiro's amazement, they lingered. Some claimed it was the most refreshing drink they had ever tasted. Others insisted it made them feel clearer and more present than any alcohol ever had. Within days, people were bringing their own cups and making regular visits to sample the nothing sake. A traveling monk stopped by and, after drinking deeply, declared, "Finally, sake that reveals rather than conceals the true nature of mind." A mother brought her children, grateful to find a brewery where they could participate safely. Merchants began meeting at Ichiro's establishment, appreciating the clarity of mind his beverage provided for negotiations. Word spread to neighboring villages. People began making pilgrimages to taste the famous nothing sake. Some claimed it cured their headaches. Others said it helped them sleep better. A few insisted it resolved their digestive problems. Ichiro listened to these testimonials with bemused wonder, saying nothing to contradict their experiences. Within a year, donations and voluntary payments from grateful visitors had not only cleared Ichiro's debts, but made him more prosperous than he had ever been as a traditional brewer. His brewery became a gathering place for honest conversation, clear thinking, and simple pleasure. When curious visitors asked the secret of his success, Ichiro would smile and say, "I stopped trying to give people what they thought they wanted and started offering what they actually needed." As the Buddha observed, truth is the highest virtue. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound power of radical honesty, even when that honesty reveals our apparent emptiness or failure. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to meet others' expectations rather than offering our authentic reality? Zen Buddhism points to several layers of conditioning that keep us trapped in this exhausting performance. First is our fear of rejection, the belief that who we truly are is somehow insufficient or unworthy of acceptance. Second is our attachment to success as conventionally defined, which blinds us to alternative forms of value and contribution. Most fundamentally, we suffer from what Zen calls comparing mind. The constant measurement of ourselves against others, against our past achievements, or against imagined standards of worthiness. This comparing mind convinces us that we must add something to ourselves, accomplish something significant, or present an enhanced version of reality in order to be valuable. But Ichiro's story reveals a different possibility. When he stopped trying to be a successful sake brewer and simply became an honest person sharing water, he discovered that authenticity itself has transformative power. People were drawn not to his product, but to his transparency, not to his expertise, but to his genuineness. Consider how much energy you spend trying to appear more knowledgeable, more successful, or more composed than you actually feel. How often do you present an edited version of yourself, highlighting strengths while hiding uncertainties? This performance requires enormous effort and creates a subtle barrier between you and others. Zen Master Bankei taught, "You have nothing to do but let your original nature shine forth." Our original nature doesn't need enhancement or improvement. It needs revelation. Like Ichiro's pure mountain water, our basic humanity, offered without pretense, often serves others more effectively than our most polished performances. The nothing sake worked not because it contained special ingredients, but because it was presented with complete honesty. People could trust it absolutely. There were no hidden effects, no false promises, no disappointments. In a world full of substances that alter consciousness in unpredictable ways, the simple clarity of pure water became precious. This teaching applies to every aspect of our lives. In relationships, our willingness to show up authentically, including our confusion, vulnerability, and imperfection, often creates deeper connection than our attempts to impress. In work, acknowledging what we don't know often proves more valuable than pretending expertise we lack. Master Linji said, "There is nothing special to do. Just be ordinary. Relieve yourself. Wash your face. Put on your clothes. And eat your food. When tired, sleep." This ordinariness, offered without apology or enhancement, contains its own magic. Tonight, as you consider the ways you might be trying to add something to your basic nature in order to make it acceptable, can you experiment with Ichiro's approach? What if your honesty about limitation became your greatest strength? What if your willingness to offer exactly what you have, nothing more and nothing less, was precisely what others needed? As the Buddha taught, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. In offering his nothing sake, Ichiro discovered that the truth of simplicity shines with its own light. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the perfection found in incompletion. In a monastery famous for its artistic traditions, there lived a painter monk named Sesshu who had devoted years to mastering the ancient art of circle painting. This practice, known as Enso, was considered one of the most challenging disciplines in Zen art, capturing the essence of enlightenment in a single, perfect, circular brushstroke. Sesshu had studied under master calligraphers, practiced countless hours, and developed extraordinary skill with brush and ink. His landscapes were admired throughout the region, and his portraits captured the inner spirit of his subjects with remarkable sensitivity. But the perfect circle remained elusive, always almost right, but never completely satisfying to his discriminating eye. For months, Sesshu prepared for the day when he would paint his masterpiece circle for his teacher, Master Tokusan. He ground his own ink from the finest pine soot, prepared handmade paper from mountain fibers, and selected brushes crafted by renowned artisans. Each morning before dawn, he practiced circular motions in the air, training his arm and wrist to move with fluid precision. The appointed day arrived with crisp autumn air and golden light filtering through the monastery windows. Sesshu arranged his materials with ceremonial care, positioning the pristine white paper before him like an altar. Master Tokusan sat nearby in silent observation, his presence both encouraging and intimidating. Sesshu knelt in formal posture, his breathing deep and centered. He dipped his brush in the rich black ink, feeling its perfect consistency. This was the moment he had prepared for with such dedication. As he raised the brush toward the paper, his mind filled with awareness of all the technical considerations, the pressure, the speed, the subtle variations that would create the perfect expression of enlightenment. But as the brush hovered above the paper, something unexpected happened. Sesshu found himself completely unable to make the first mark. Minutes passed in stillness. The ink dried on his brush. He prepared it again, raised it again, and again found himself frozen in the space before creation. For 3 hours, Sesshu remained motionless, the brush poised above the unmarked paper. Master Tokusan watched without comment as various expressions crossed the young monk's face. Concentration, frustration, confusion, and finally, a deep peace. At last, Sesshu slowly lowered his brush and carefully rolled up the blank scroll. With steady hands, he presented the empty paper to his master. Master Tokusan examined the offering thoughtfully. "This appears incomplete," he observed. "No, master," Sesshu replied with quiet confidence. "This is the circle before it became imperfect." The master's eyes lit with understanding and approval. He immediately hung the blank scroll in the monastery's main meditation hall, where it remained for decades, teaching countless students about the nature of completion and incompletion. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the perfect way is without difficulty, save that it avoids picking and choosing. The deeper teaching here shows us how our pursuit of perfection often prevents us from recognizing the completeness that already exists. Why do we become so fixated on completion that we miss the perfection of the unmanifest? Zen Buddhism reveals that our compulsion to finish, to achieve, to make our mark stems from what might be called accomplishment mind. The belief that value emerges only through doing rather than being, through creation rather than pure awareness. Sesshu's realization points to a profound truth about the nature of potential. Before the brush touches paper, all possibilities exist simultaneously. The circle is neither good nor bad, neither accurate nor flawed. It exists in a state of pure potential that includes every possible expression while being limited by none. Consider how often we rush to fill empty spaces. In conversation, in our schedules, in moments of silence. We've been conditioned to believe that emptiness represents lack rather than fullness, that blank spaces need to be occupied rather than appreciated. But Sesshu discovered that the unmarked paper contained every possible circle, while any actual mark would eliminate infinite alternatives. This teaching challenges our productivity-obsessed culture, which measures worth primarily through output and achievement. We fill our days with activities, our conversations with words, our minds with thoughts, rarely pausing to appreciate the pregnant emptiness from which all expression emerges. Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Sesshu forgot his desire to create something impressive and instead became intimate with the creative source itself. In that intimacy, he realized that the source needs no improvement or expression to be complete. The blank scroll in the meditation hall served as a powerful teaching tool. students would sit before it and gradually understand that their own Buddha nature is like that unmarked paper, already perfect, needing nothing added to make it complete. The meditation itself was the circle, not any particular experience or achievement within the meditation. This doesn't suggest we should never act or create. Rather, it points to a different relationship with our actions, one that recognizes the completeness that exists before, during, and after any particular accomplishment. When we understand this, our activities become expressions of fullness rather than attempts to achieve it. In Japanese aesthetics, this principle appears as mono, no aware, the poignant beauty of impermanence and incompletion. Gardens are designed to suggest rather than state. Paintings leave space for the viewer's imagination, and poetry captures moments that dissolve even as they're expressed. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox captures Sesshu's insight perfectly. We are already complete, like the unmarked paper, and any improvements we make are simply new expressions of that inherent completeness. Tonight, as you notice your tendency to fill quiet moments with activity or complete every task before resting, can you appreciate the perfection of incompletion? Perhaps there's a project you've been struggling to finish that might be perfect exactly as it is. Maybe there's a conversation that doesn't need resolution, or a problem that doesn't require immediate solving. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Sesshu's blank circle reminds us that the peace we seek through accomplishment already exists in the space before we begin. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore one more story about accepting the uncontrollable nature of existence. High in the mountains, where clouds gathered and dispersed with mysterious rhythms, there lived a hermit named Dokai, who had earned an unusual reputation among the villagers in the valley below. Through years of careful observation and deep attunement to natural patterns, he had developed an uncanny ability to predict weather changes. Farmers would make the steep climb to his simple hut before planting seasons. Fishermen consulted him before important voyages, and festival organizers sought his guidance for outdoor celebrations. Dokai's predictions were remarkably accurate, and his humble manner made him beloved by all who knew him. He never claimed supernatural powers, insisting he simply listened carefully to what the mountain and sky were already saying. One summer, after months without rain, the valley faced a severe drought. Crops were withering, wells were running dry, and the villagers faced the prospect of famine. A desperate farmer named Kenji climbed the mountain path with his young son, both of them gaunt from rationing their food. "Master Dokai," Kenji pleaded, prostrating himself before the hermit's hut. "Our village is dying. The rice paddies are cracked earth, the vegetables have turned to dust, and our children cry from hunger. Please, can you pray to the heavens for rain? Surely your connection to the natural world gives you influence over the weather." Dokai felt great compassion for the suffering farmer and his child. Though he had never attempted to control weather, only predict it, the desperate situation moved him to try. "I will sit in meditation all night," he promised, "and ask the sky to share its water with your village." As the sun set, Dokai positioned himself on a flat rock overlooking the valley and entered deep meditation. He had never prayed for specific weather before, but his heart was filled with genuine concern for the villagers' welfare. Through the long night, he sat in stillness. His consciousness expanded to embrace the vast sky, sending heartfelt requests for rain to whatever forces governed the elements. At dawn, his meditation was interrupted by the sound of thunder. Dark clouds had gathered with surprising speed, and within minutes, torrential rain began falling. Dokai smiled with relief and gratitude, believing his prayers had been answered. The rain would save the village. But the rain did not stop. For 7 days and nights, it poured with relentless intensity. The drought was indeed broken, but the deluge was far worse than the dry spell. Fields flooded, houses were swept away, livestock drowned, and the very villagers Dokai had tried to help found themselves in greater peril than before. On the 8th day, as the rain finally ceased, angry villagers made their way up the muddy mountain path. Kenji led them, his face twisted with rage and grief. His son had been among those lost in the flooding. "You said you would pray for rain," Kenji shouted at the hermit. "I asked for rain to save our crops, not a flood to destroy our lives. Why did you bring this disaster upon us?" Dokai looked at the grieving father with deep sadness and complete honesty. "I asked for rain too," he said simply. Apparently, the sky wasn't listening to either of us. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Here we discover the profound difference between influence and control, between working with natural forces and attempting to command them. Why do we so often confuse our ability to predict or influence with the power to control? Zen Buddhism points to a fundamental misunderstanding about our relationship to the larger forces of existence. We develop skills, gain knowledge, and accumulate experience, then gradually begin to believe these capabilities make us masters of circumstances rather than participants in them. Dokai's expertise in weather prediction had earned him a reputation that exceeded his actual powers. The villagers' desperation led them to project magical abilities onto his natural sensitivity. Even Dokai himself was seduced into believing his spiritual practice might grant him influence over forces far beyond human control. This pattern appears constantly in our lives. We master certain skills and begin to expect mastery over all related outcomes. We eat well and exercise regularly, then feel betrayed when illness strikes. We work diligently and make wise decisions, then rage when external circumstances disrupt our plans. We practice meditation and study wisdom, then become frustrated when difficult emotions or challenging situations persist. Look deeply at your own relationship with control. How often do you take credit when things go well and feel personally responsible when they don't? How much energy do you spend trying to manage outcomes that are largely beyond your influence? Master Nagarjuna taught, "Neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause, does anything whatever, anywhere, arise." This teaching points to the interdependent nature of all phenomena. The rain that fell on Dokai's village arose from countless causes and conditions: atmospheric pressure, wind patterns, temperature variations, and cycles far too complex for any individual to orchestrate. Dokai's response to the angry villagers demonstrates profound wisdom. He didn't claim that the flood was part of some divine plan, nor did he accept responsibility for forces beyond his control. He simply acknowledged the truth. Both he and the farmer had asked for rain, and what came was neither what either of them had requested, nor something either could have prevented. This teaching invites us to hold our prayers, intentions, and efforts more lightly. We can ask, we can work skillfully, we can align ourselves with positive outcomes, but we cannot guarantee results. The universe operates according to principles that exceed our understanding and influence. Zen practice cultivates what might be called effortless effort, engaging fully with life while holding outcomes loosely. We plant seeds without demanding that they grow in exactly the way we envision. We offer our best to relationships without controlling how others respond. We pursue meaningful work without insisting that external recognition follow. Tonight, as you consider the areas of your life where you've been trying to control uncontrollable forces, can you release those efforts while maintaining your care and engagement? Perhaps there's a situation where you've been fighting reality instead of working skillfully within it. Maybe there's an outcome you've been demanding rather than hoping for. As the Buddha taught, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. Even when life brings us floods instead of gentle rain, our response can be one of acceptance rather than rage, wisdom rather than blame. In releasing our demand for control, we discover a different kind of power, the strength that comes from harmony with what is. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the most fundamental truth that surrounds us yet remains invisible. This is the tale of the fish and the ocean. In the vast depths of the Pacific, where sunlight filtered down through layers of blue and green, and coral gardens swayed in gentle currents, a young fish swam restlessly through familiar waters. Despite being surrounded by the wonder of ocean life, schools of silver fish moving like liquid metal, sea anemones dancing in the current, and the rhythmic pulse of waves far above, the young fish felt troubled by a persistent question. One day, approaching an ancient sea turtle whose shell bore the scars and wisdom of countless journeys, the young fish asked earnestly, "Elder, I keep hearing other sea creatures talk about something they call the ocean. They speak of it with such reverence, as if it's the most important thing in existence. But I've searched everywhere, and I cannot find this ocean anywhere. What exactly is this mysterious thing everyone talks about?" The old turtle's eyes, deep and patient like tidal pools, regarded the young fish with gentle amusement. "Little one," the turtle replied in a voice worn smooth by decades of storms and calms, "the ocean is this very thing that surrounds you on all sides at every moment." The young fish looked around frantically, darting left and right, swimming up toward the distant surface and down toward the sandy bottom. "But I don't see anything surrounding me. There's nothing here but water and fish and plants and rocks. Where is this ocean you speak of? Why can't I see it?" The turtle settled more comfortably on a bed of soft kelp, understanding that this was a teaching moment that required patience. "Of course you cannot see it, young friend," the turtle explained. "The ocean is both inside and outside of you. You were born in the ocean. You breathe the ocean. You are nourished by the ocean. And one day you will return to the ocean. The ocean flows through your gills and around your body just as naturally as your own scales cover your skin. It is so much a part of you that it has become invisible." The young fish paused, beginning to sense something vast and fundamental that had been present all along but remained unnamed. "You mean this water I swim through?" "Is the ocean, yes," the turtle confirmed. "You have never been separate from it, not for a single moment of your existence. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with awareness." This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with the Tao, the fundamental flow of existence that permeates everything, yet remains largely unnoticed in our daily lives. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual blindness. Like the fish who cannot see the ocean, we live immersed in the sacred, but fail to recognize it because it is too close, too constant, too fundamental to our existence to register as separate from ourselves. Why do we struggle to perceive the Tao, this universal flow that sustains and surrounds us? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of seeking the extraordinary while overlooking the ordinary. We imagine that spiritual truth must be dramatic, mystical, or separate from everyday experience. We look for God in burning bushes while missing the divine presence in morning coffee, in the breath entering our lungs, in the simple fact of awareness itself. The Tao expresses itself in everything we encounter: the changing seasons, the cycles of sleep and waking, the rhythm of our heartbeat, the way thoughts arise and dissolve in consciousness. It is the organizing principle behind both the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of fern leaves, the same pattern expressing itself at every scale of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you might glimpse this underlying flow without recognizing it. The way traffic naturally organizes itself, despite having no central controller. The way conversations find their own rhythm and timing. The way your body breathes without conscious direction. The way solutions to problems seem to emerge from somewhere beyond deliberate thinking. These are all expressions of the Tao working through apparent chaos to create spontaneous order. Zen teacher Alan Watts taught, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The Tao is similar. It cannot be grasped or contained because we are expressions of it rather than separate observers of it. Every attempt to understand the Tao through conceptual thinking is like the fish trying to get outside the ocean to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean the Tao is merely a philosophical concept. It is the most practical and immediate reality. The intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body. The awareness in which all thoughts and sensations appear. The life force that animates everything from redwood trees to bacteria. In Chinese philosophy, the character for Tao literally means the way or the path. But this is not a path we walk towards some distant destination. It is the path that walks itself through us, the way reality unfolds moment by moment, without requiring our management or control. Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Yet here we are, using words to point towards something beyond words. This is the beautiful paradox of spiritual teaching. We must use the limited to point toward the unlimited, knowing that the finger pointing at the moon is never the moon itself. Tonight, as you feel the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, can you sense the Tao expressing itself through this simple miracle? Can you recognize in this automatic process the same intelligence that moves the planets and changes the seasons? The Buddha taught, "Look within, thou art the Buddha." You are not separate from the ocean of existence any more than a wave is separate from the sea. In recognizing this fundamental non-separation, we stop seeking the Tao and begin living as its conscious expression. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all three in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stonecutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stonecutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete. The rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky, gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noblemen and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. "I wish to be a cloud." And so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. "A mere rock more powerful than I? I wish to be a rock." Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon, he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. "A puny creature more powerful than me! I want to be a man again!" And so he found himself once more a stonecutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned, richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. "I'll be happy when I get promoted," only to discover new stresses. "I'll be content with more money," only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is, while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Now, let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the paradox of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a renowned Zen master whose students achieved profound realization through diligent practice. Filled with spiritual ambition and eager to transform his life, the young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with enthusiasm, he immediately sought an audience with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room overlooking a garden, where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and graceful. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with absolute diligence and unwavering effort, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that radiated from his posture. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely, with the right approach, the process could be accelerated. "But master," he said, leaning forward intently, "what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more texts, practice more intensively? How long then?" The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, "Well, 20 years. The young man's face showed his confusion and growing frustration. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his commitment. "But master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this," he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if I really, really work at it? What if I dedicate every waking moment to practice, sleep only when absolutely necessary, and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then I could achieve realization much faster. How long would it take then?" 30 years, the master replied without hesitation. By now, the student was completely bewildered and increasingly agitated. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, martial arts, scholarship, harder work produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? "Master, I do not understand," he said, no longer able to hide his disappointment and confusion. Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. "When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path," the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the paradox of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal fixation actually slow our spiritual development? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that excessive focus on attainment creates obstacles to realization. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our consciousness is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined destination, we cannot fully inhabit the present moment practices that actually cultivate awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you'll be good enough to perform publicly, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, rhythm, and tone that develops skill. The music emerges through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between musician and instrument, not through anxious projection toward future competence. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the subtle grasping that turns spiritual practice into a transaction. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study texts to accumulate wisdom, or cultivate compassion to become better people, we're approaching the path as consumers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a fundamental split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This profound teaching points to the very heart of the master's lesson. Zen is not something we attain, but something we recognize. It's not a destination we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom illuminates why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we're frantically pursuing enlightenment, we're operating from the assumption that our present experience is somehow inadequate or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we're seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most profound insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without agenda. These moments of natural awareness reveal what the master was pointing toward, that wisdom emerges when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else, or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's error wasn't his desire for realization, but his assumption that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he proposed working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster, the more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to flee. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called just sitting. Meditation without gaining mind, without agenda, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than forcing them through willful effort. Consider how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships, where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work, where forcing inspiration typically produces stilted results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined destinations, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." By walking the path with undivided attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. Let us now explore a story about choice, responsibility, and the power we hold in every moment. This is the tale of the young man and the bird. A clever young student had grown tired of his teacher's seemingly wise responses to every question. He was convinced that the old master simply spoke in riddles to appear profound, and he decided to devise a test that would expose what he believed was mere pretense. After thinking for several days, he conceived what he thought was the perfect trap. One morning, the young man caught a small sparrow in the garden. The tiny bird trembled in his cupped hands, its heart beating rapidly against his palms. He held it carefully behind his back as he approached his teacher, who was sitting peacefully in the morning sunlight, reading ancient texts. "Master," the student called out with barely concealed excitement, "I have a question that will test your legendary wisdom." The old teacher looked up from his reading with patient, gentle eyes. He had seen this look of mischievous confidence in many students over the years, and he understood the young man's need to challenge authority as part of his own growth and learning. "Please," the teacher said simply, "ask your question." The student stepped closer, keeping the bird hidden behind his back. "Master, I hold a small bird in my hands. Using your great wisdom, tell me, is this bird alive or dead?" The young man felt incredibly clever. He had created what he believed was an impossible situation for his teacher. If the master answered alive, he would quickly snap the bird's neck and reveal the dead creature, proving the teacher wrong. If the master answered dead, he would simply open his hands and let the living bird fly away, again proving the teacher's lack of true insight. Either way, the student was certain he would expose his teacher's supposed wisdom as nothing more than lucky guessing and philosophical double talk. He waited eagerly for the response that would give him the satisfaction of finally outsmarting the old man. The teacher sat quietly for a long moment, not trying to peer behind the student's back or gather more information. His eyes seemed to look not at the student, but through him, as if perceiving something far deeper than the simple trick being attempted. Finally, with a gentle smile that held both compassion and understanding, the master spoke. "The answer, my young friend, is in your hands." The student stood frozen, his mouth hanging open slightly. In 3 simple words, his elaborate trap had been completely dismantled. The teacher hadn't fallen for either option of the false dilemma. Instead, he had pointed to something far more profound: the fundamental truth that the student himself held the power to determine the outcome. The young man looked down at his hands, still cupped behind his back, feeling the tiny bird's rapid heartbeat against his palms. He realized with startling clarity that the master was right. The bird's fate had never depended on the teacher's answer or supposed wisdom. It had always been entirely in the student's control. More than that, he began to understand that this was true about far more than just this moment. The power to choose life or death, creation or destruction, compassion or cruelty, all of it was always in his hands, in every situation, every day. Slowly, the young man brought his hands forward and opened them. The small bird sat still for just a moment, as if gathering itself, then spread its wings and flew into the blue sky, disappearing among the trees. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound responsibility that comes with conscious choice and the recognition that we are always the architects of our own experience. Why do we so often look outside ourselves for answers that can only be found within? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to seek authority figures who will tell us what to do, what to think, what to choose. But the deepest teaching is that true wisdom cannot be given from one person to another. It can only be discovered through our own conscious engagement with life. The student's question seemed to be about the teacher's insight, but it was actually about his own power. He was so focused on proving the master wrong that he almost missed the profound truth being offered, that every moment presents us with choices that shape not only our immediate circumstances, but our character and destiny. Consider your own daily decisions, both large and small. How often do you wait for someone else to tell you what the right choice is? How frequently do you seek permission, approval, or guidance for decisions that ultimately rest entirely in your own hands? The young man's bird represents all the power we hold, but sometimes fail to recognize. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual development, we constantly face moments where we hold something precious in our hands, the well-being of others, our own integrity, opportunities for growth or destruction. The outcome depends not on external circumstances or other people's wisdom, but on what we choose to do with the power we possess. The Master's response reveals something crucial about authentic teaching. True teachers don't give answers. They point us back to our own capacity for wisdom. They help us recognize the choices we're already making and the power we already possess, rather than encouraging dependence on their authority. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "We are always in choice, even when we think we're not." The bird in the student's hands represents all the moments when we convince ourselves we have no options, no power, no responsibility. But consciousness always involves choice, and choice always involves responsibility. Look deeply at a current challenge in your life. Where are you waiting for someone else to provide answers, solutions, or direction? What would change if you fully recognize that the power to shape the outcome is already in your hands? This doesn't mean you have control over all external circumstances, but you always have choice about how you respond. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Every thought, every intention, every action is like the student's choice with the bird, an opportunity to create life or death, beauty or suffering, wisdom or ignorance. The answer is always in our hands. Tonight, as you consider the various situations in your life where you seek guidance or feel powerless, can you sense the truth the Master was pointing to? Can you feel the weight of the choices you carry every day, not as a burden, but as the fundamental dignity of conscious existence? As the Buddha observed, no one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. The bird flies free, not because of the teacher's wisdom, but because of the student's choice. In recognizing our own power to choose life over death, compassion over cruelty, truth over deception, we discover that the answer to every important question has always been in our hands. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between superficial understanding and lived wisdom. This is the tale of following the stream. In the heart of a vast wilderness, where towering pines stretched toward endless sky, two city dwellers found themselves completely lost. They had ventured into the high timber for what was supposed to be a simple day hike. But overconfidence and poor preparation had led them far from any familiar trail. For a day and a night, they wandered through the dense forest, their anxiety growing with each passing hour. The comfortable urban world they knew seemed impossibly distant. Every tree looked the same. Every path led to another confusing intersection, and their sense of direction had completely abandoned them. Just as panic was beginning to set in, they stumbled upon an old hermit sitting peacefully beside a small clearing. His weathered face spoke of years spent in solitude, and his calm presence offered immediate comfort to the desperate travelers. "How do we find our way back to civilization?" they asked urgently, their voices carrying the desperation of people who had exhausted their own resources. The hermit looked at them with kind eyes that seemed to see more than their immediate predicament. "I could tell you," he replied thoughtfully, "but you'd still get lost." The two men exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the straightforward directions they had hoped for. "What should we do?" they asked, their frustration evident. "Go with the flow," the hermit answered simply. "I beg your pardon," one of them responded, clearly expecting something more practical and specific. The hermit smiled and gestured toward a small stream that bubbled cheerfully through the clearing. "Go with the flow. You see that stream over there? Just follow it. Streams go into creeks, and creeks go into rivers, and rivers go through towns. Also, along the way you'll have water to drink and berries to eat." This practical advice made immediate sense to the lost travelers. Following water downstream was indeed a reliable way to find human settlements, and the stream would provide essential resources they needed for survival during their journey. But one of the men, perhaps having heard spiritual teachings before, asked a deeper question. "Is that what Zen people mean when they say, 'go with the flow'?" The hermit paused for a moment, considering this question with the same careful attention he had given their practical need for directions. "Yes and no," he replied enigmatically, and then continued along his way, leaving the two men to find their own understanding of his words. The Buddha once said, "If you understand, things are just as they are. If you do not understand, things are just as they are." This teaching points to the layered nature of wisdom that the hermit embodied in his response to the lost travelers. The deeper teaching here shows us how authentic spiritual guidance operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The hermit's advice was both completely practical and profoundly metaphorical. On the surface level, following the stream was simply good wilderness survival strategy. On a deeper level, it represented the entire approach to living that Zen encourages. Why did the hermit say the travelers would still get lost, even if he gave them directions? This points to a fundamental truth about the difference between receiving information and developing wisdom. External directions can guide us temporarily, but they don't develop our inner capacity for navigation. Real wisdom involves learning to read the natural signs and flow with the underlying currents of life itself. Consider how this applies to our spiritual seeking. We often approach teachers and teachings looking for specific directions. Tell me exactly what to do to become enlightened. Give me the precise meditation technique that will solve my problems. But this approach, while understandable, misses the deeper point. True spiritual guidance doesn't provide a map, but teaches us how to read the territory. It doesn't give us someone else's answers, but helps us develop the capacity to find our own. Like the stream that naturally knows its way to the ocean, we each have an innate wisdom that can guide us if we learn to trust and follow it. The phrase "go with the flow" has become so common in popular culture that it's almost lost its meaning, often interpreted as passive resignation or lack of direction. But the hermit's yes and no response points to a more nuanced understanding. True flowing isn't about drifting aimlessly, but about aligning our efforts with the natural currents of wisdom and compassion. The stream represents the Tao, the natural way that underlies all existence. When we align ourselves with this deeper flow, our actions become effortless and effective. We stop pushing against reality and learn to work with the grain of existence rather than against it. But this requires developing a different kind of intelligence than our usual problem-solving mind. The travelers wanted explicit directions because that's how the rational mind works, through clear, step-by-step instructions. But the deeper intelligence the hermit was pointing toward operates more like intuition, sensing the right direction moment by moment rather than following a predetermined plan. This is why contemplative traditions emphasize present moment awareness. The stream doesn't need to know where the ocean is. It simply flows in the direction that feels natural right now. Similarly, when we develop moment-to-moment mindfulness, we can sense the appropriate response to each situation without needing to figure out the entire journey in advance. Tonight, as you navigate the complexities of your own life, can you sense the streams of natural wisdom flowing beneath the surface of your daily concerns? What would it mean to trust that deeper current while still attending responsibly to practical necessities? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The hermit's guidance was like lighting a candle in the travelers' minds, providing not just directions, but a way of approaching life that could serve them in countless future situations. Now, let us explore a story about fearlessness and the power that comes from accepting what cannot be changed. This is the encounter between the general and the Zen master who could not be moved. During the violent civil wars that tore through feudal Japan, armies swept across the countryside like natural disasters, conquering villages and controlling territories through force and intimidation. When word spread that a particular warlord's army was approaching, most people would flee with whatever possessions they could carry, seeking safety in the mountains or with relatives in distant towns. In one small village, as the dreaded army drew near, the familiar pattern repeated itself. Families packed hastily, merchants closed their shops, and within hours, the streets that had been busy with daily life stood empty and silent. Everyone had fled. Everyone, that is, except the old Zen master who lived in the simple temple at the village center. When the conquering army arrived and found the village deserted, the general was surprised to discover smoke still rising from the temple chimney. Curious about who would have the audacity, or perhaps the foolishness, to remain when everyone else had fled, he decided to investigate this anomaly personally. The general approached the temple with several of his lieutenants, expecting to find either a frail old man too weak to flee, or perhaps someone who had been unable to escape in time. What he found instead was the Zen master sitting peacefully in his garden, tending to his plants as if nothing unusual was happening around him. The general had grown accustomed to fear and submission wherever his army went. Village leaders would prostrate themselves before him, pleading for mercy and offering tribute in hopes of avoiding destruction. Citizens would cower and flee at the mere sight of his soldiers. This old man's calm indifference to his presence was both puzzling and irritating. When he wasn't treated with the deference and submissiveness to which he was accustomed, the general's face darkened with growing anger. Here was someone who didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation or respect the power he represented. "You fool!" the general shouted, his voice echoing through the empty courtyard as he reached for his sword. His elaborate armor gleamed menacingly in the afternoon light, and his hand gripped his weapon with practiced ease. "Don't you realize that you are standing before a man who could run you through without blinking an eye?" The threat that had terrorized countless others left the master completely unmoved. He continued his careful tending of a small flowering bush, his hands steady and his expression serene. When he finally looked up at the general, it was with the same calm attention he had shown before, as if greeting any ordinary visitor to his garden. "And do you realize," the master replied with perfect equanimity, "that you are standing before a man who can be run through without blinking an eye?" The general stood speechless, his sword half drawn. His anger suddenly dissolved into something approaching awe. In all his years of warfare and conquest, he had encountered many forms of courage. The desperate bravery of cornered soldiers, the defiant rage of defeated enemies, the foolish boldness of young warriors. But he had never encountered anything like this. Complete acceptance without fear, total peace in the face of death. The master's response revealed something the general had never considered, that there could be a power greater than the ability to kill, and that was the complete absence of fear about being killed. Here was someone who had so fully accepted the temporary nature of existence that even the threat of immediate death held no power over him. Slowly, the general returned his sword to its sheath. Without another word, he turned and walked away from the temple, leaving the master to continue his gardening in peace. The village remained untouched by the war, not because of any military strategy or negotiated protection, but because of one man's absolute fearlessness. As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. Here we discover the profound power that emerges when we fully accept this fundamental truth, rather than spending our lives trying to escape it. Why does complete acceptance of mortality create such presence and authority? Zen Buddhism reveals that most of our fear comes not from external threats, but from our desperate clinging to what is inherently temporary. When that clinging dissolves, the threats themselves lose their power to disturb our inner peace. The general's power came from others' fear of death and loss, but someone who has fully accepted the temporary nature of existence cannot be threatened with what he has already willingly released. The master's fearlessness wasn't bravado or indifference. It was the natural result of understanding impermanence so completely that even his own death held no terror. Consider your own relationship with threats and intimidation in daily life. How much of your fear comes from attachment to maintaining your current circumstances, preserving your reputation, or protecting your physical comfort? The master's response suggests that true invulnerability comes not from being untouchable, but from having nothing that can be taken away. This doesn't mean being passive or welcoming harm. The master wasn't seeking death or encouraging violence. Rather, his complete acceptance of mortality's inevitability freed him from the paralyzing fear that controls most people when facing genuine danger. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The master's single response contained more power than any threat because it came from a place of absolute acceptance rather than resistance or fear. Tonight, as you consider the various pressures and threats you face, can you remember the master's profound response to the general's sword? Can you find the space where acceptance of impermanence creates not resignation, but a kind of unshakable presence that cannot be intimidated? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the whole secret of existence is to have no fear. True freedom comes not from avoiding danger, but from understanding so completely that we cannot ultimately be harmed, that external threats become powerless to disturb our essential peace. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising 2 fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here. The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise, for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man! I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these 2 very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, "he insulted me by holding up 1 finger to indicate that I had only 1 eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation. Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up 2 fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with 2 eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment." The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up 3 fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the 2 of us, there were only 3 eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners. The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how 2 people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our 2 monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind. Maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Our next story reveals the difference between technical mastery and true mastery of oneself. This is the lesson of the archer and the bridge. A young man had devoted years to perfecting his skill with the bow and arrow. Day after day, he practiced in all weather conditions, his dedication absolute, his focus unwavering. His technique became flawless, his aim so precise that he rarely missed his target, even at great distances. Word of his remarkable ability spread throughout the region, and he began winning archery contests one after another, each victory feeding his growing pride and confidence. Flush with success, and perhaps a bit intoxicated by his own reputation, the young archer decided to seek out the ultimate challenge. He had heard whispered stories of an old Zen master who lived high in the mountains, a man renowned not only for his spiritual wisdom, but also for his legendary skill with the bow. I will challenge this old master, the young man thought, and when I defeat him, everyone will know that I am the greatest archer in all the land. He found the master's simple dwelling and issued his challenge with the confidence of youth. "Old man," he said, perhaps more boldly than was respectful, "I have heard of your reputation with the bow. I challenge you to demonstrate whether your skill can match mine." The master, ancient eyes twinkling with quiet amusement, simply nodded his acceptance. The young archer immediately set up his demonstration. He selected a target at a considerable distance, drew his bow with practiced precision, and let loose his arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the exact center of the bullseye with a satisfying thud. Without pausing, he notched a second arrow, drew, aimed, and fired again. This arrow split the first arrow down its center, a feat of such technical brilliance that few archers in the world could have accomplished it. The young man turned to the master with obvious satisfaction, his chest puffed with pride. "There," he said, gesturing toward his perfect demonstration. "Let's see if you can match that display of skill." The old master looked at the target, then at the young man, and smiled gently. But instead of drawing his own bow, he simply motioned for the archer to follow him. "Come," he said quietly, "let us find a more suitable place for this demonstration." Curious about what the old man had in mind, and confident that no location could diminish his superior abilities, the young archer followed the master up a winding mountain path. They climbed higher and higher, the air growing thinner, the path more treacherous, until finally they reached a place where the mountain was split by a deep chasm. Spanning this terrifying gap was a single fallen log, weathered and narrow, that served as a bridge between the two sides. Far below, so far that the bottom disappeared into shadow, the chasm yawned like a hungry mouth. The slightest misstep would mean certain death. Without a word, the old master calmly stepped out onto this precarious bridge. His movements were unhurried, graceful, completely at ease despite the mortal danger. When he reached the center of the log, where it sagged slightly and swayed with his weight, he paused and turned to face a distant tree on the far side of the chasm. Drawing his bow with the same casual precision he might use in his own garden, the master took aim and released his arrow. It flew across the void and struck the distant tree with a clean, direct hit. Not necessarily more accurate than the young man's shots, but accomplished under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned warrior. The master then gracefully stepped back onto solid ground and gestured toward the log bridge. "Now it is your turn," he said simply. The young archer approached the edge of the chasm and looked down into the seemingly bottomless abyss. His mouth went dry, his palms began to sweat, and his legs trembled beneath him. The very thought of stepping onto that narrow, unstable bridge filled him with paralyzing terror. The technical skill that had made him so confident suddenly seemed irrelevant in the face of this primal fear. He tried to force himself forward, but his body refused to obey. His hands shook so violently that he couldn't even grip his bow properly, much less aim with any precision. The steady breathing and focused concentration that had served him so well in controlled conditions completely abandoned him. The master watched this struggle with compassionate understanding. "You have developed great skill with your bow," he observed gently, "but you have little skill with the mind that lets loose the shot." As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between mastery of technique and mastery of the mind that employs the technique. Why do we so often mistake technical proficiency for true mastery? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to focus on external accomplishments while neglecting the inner development that makes those accomplishments meaningful. We perfect our skills in controlled environments, but discover our limitations when facing uncertainty, danger, or genuine challenge. The young archer had indeed achieved remarkable technical skill, but only under ideal conditions. When his environment changed, when fear entered the equation, when the stakes became real, when his sense of safety was threatened, his carefully cultivated abilities disappeared entirely. His mastery was revealed to be shallow, dependent on external circumstances rather than inner stability. Consider your own areas of expertise. How does your competence hold up under pressure? When faced with genuine stakes, unfamiliar circumstances, or emotional challenges, do your skills remain intact, or do they crumble like the young archer's confidence on the bridge? In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unshakable presence, the ability to remain centered and effective regardless of external conditions. This doesn't mean eliminating fear or challenge, but developing the inner stability that allows us to function skillfully even when afraid, uncertain, or under pressure. The master's demonstration wasn't about showing superior archery skills. It was about revealing the profound difference between skill that depends on perfect conditions and skill that emerges from inner mastery. His arrow didn't need to be more accurate than the young man's. It simply needed to be released from a place of genuine equanimity. Zen Master Bankei taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle any situation." This points to a quality of awareness that remains constant, whether we're shooting at safe targets or standing on precipices. It's the difference between confidence that comes from controlling our environment and confidence that comes from trusting our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." One arrow shot from genuine presence and inner stability has more value than 1,000 arrows shot from ego and carefully controlled conditions. True mastery reveals itself not in perfect circumstances, but in our ability to maintain our center when everything around us is uncertain. Look deeply at your own relationship to challenge and fear. Where in your life do you perform well in safe, controlled environments but struggle when stakes are raised or conditions become unpredictable? This isn't a failure. It's simply information about where your practice needs to deepen. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and competencies you've developed, can you distinguish between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you sense the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenge and the confidence that comes from meeting challenge with presence? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. Life is the bridge over the chasm, uncertain, sometimes frightening, always requiring us to find our balance, not in the safety of solid ground, but in our ability to remain centered while walking through space. True mastery isn't about perfect aim. It's about maintaining our equilibrium, no matter where we find ourselves standing. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, He found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow." But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change. Water doesn't fight the mountainside. it finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax right now and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master were sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes, and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. Now, let us explore a story about the nature of genuine assistance and the goal of true teaching. This is the encounter between the psychiatrist and the Zen master. At a gathering of professionals and spiritual teachers, a psychiatrist found himself in conversation with a renowned Zen master. The psychiatrist had built his career on helping people work through their psychological difficulties, analyzing their problems, and providing therapeutic interventions designed to improve their mental health and emotional well-being. Curious about how different approaches to helping might compare, the psychiatrist decided to ask the master a direct question that had been on his mind throughout their conversation. "I've spent years learning various techniques for helping people with their emotional and psychological struggles," the psychiatrist said. "I'm curious about your approach. Exactly how do you help people?" The master listened to the question with the same calm attention he brought to everything, considering not just the words but the assumptions underlying them. After a moment of thoughtful silence, he offered a response that was both simple and profound. "I get them to a place where they can't ask any more questions," the master replied. The psychiatrist paused, uncertain whether this was meant as a serious answer or perhaps some kind of Zen riddle. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "Surely questioning is important in any process of growth and understanding." The master smiled gently. Questions arise from the mind that believes it lacks something. When someone reaches the place where questions naturally cease, they have found what they were truly seeking all along. Buddha's wisdom tells us, doubt everything, find your own light. Yet this ancient teaching reveals a paradox. True finding comes not through endless questioning, but through arriving at a completeness where questions become unnecessary. Why do we assume that helping people means providing answers to their questions when the deepest healing might involve dissolving the questioner itself? Zen Buddhism points to the possibility that many of our problems exist only because we continue to ask the questions that create and maintain them. The psychiatrist's approach, like that of most helping professions, focuses on analyzing problems, understanding their origins, and developing strategies for managing or resolving them. This method has value and can provide genuine relief for many forms of suffering. But the master's approach suggests something more radical. Helping people transcend the very framework that generates their problems. Consider the endless questions that occupy your own mind. How can I be happier? Why do I keep making the same mistakes? What should I do with my life? How can I find meaning? Each question implies a questioner who lacks something, who needs something, who must figure something out. But what if the questioner itself is the source of the seeking? In Zen practice, we discover that many of our problems are maintained by the very effort to solve them. The mind that constantly asks, "How can I find peace?" is the same mind that disturbs the peace that is naturally present. The person who desperately seeks enlightenment may be reinforcing the very sense of separation that creates the feeling of being unenlightened. The master's method of getting people where they can't ask any more questions isn't about suppressing inquiry or promoting ignorance. Rather, it's about guiding people to a direct experience of completeness where questions naturally dissolve because there's nothing more to seek. Zen Master Bankai taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle anything that comes up." When someone truly realizes their fundamental completeness, questions about how to be complete simply cease to arise. Problems don't need to be solved. They're recognized as temporary appearances in the vast space of awareness. This doesn't mean practical questions disappear entirely. What should I have for lunch? Or, which route should I take to work? Are functional questions that serve practical purposes. The questions that cease are the existential ones that arise from a fundamental sense of lack or incompleteness. The Buddha said, "There is nothing to do, nothing to gain, nothing to lose." This teaching points to the same understanding the Master was indicating. True help comes not from giving people more to do or figure out, but from helping them realize they are already what they seek. Look deeply at your own relationship with questions and seeking. How much of your mental energy goes toward trying to solve the problem of your life rather than living it? What would remain if you stopped asking the questions that assume something is fundamentally wrong or missing? The psychiatrist helps by analyzing and providing tools. The Master helps by pointing to what needs no analysis or improvement. Both approaches can serve, but the Master's method aims for the root rather than the branches, dissolving the seeker rather than satisfying the seeking. Tonight, as you notice the questions that typically occupy your mind, can you sense what lies beneath them? Can you find the space of awareness that exists prior to all questions, the completeness that needs no answers because it lacks nothing? As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The deepest help we can receive or offer others is the recognition that what we seek has never been absent. Questions cease, not because they've been answered, but because the one who was asking them discovers there was never actually anything to ask about. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission. This is the tale of Bankei and the messenger. In the bustling capital city, where merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the renowned Zen master Bankei had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his profound insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankei maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to depart for his next destination, carefully folding his few possessions into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone accustomed to moving in aristocratic circles, likely a retainer or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Venerable master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have detained him today. Would you consider postponing your departure by one day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow?" Bankei, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion, even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply, "I shall remain one more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankei waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached. But instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand, what is the true nature of consciousness, and how can one realize it directly? If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it. Bankai listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the profound impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankai spoke with characteristic simplicity and directness. This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer, between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to transmit through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be. Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, embodying the very teaching he had just articulated. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This profound truth reveals itself in Bankai's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by proxy. Spiritual awakening cannot be transmitted second-hand because it is not information, but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and conveyed through intermediaries? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected, rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual transmission requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through intimate investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or transmitted because we are expressions of it. Bankei's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with diligence. The path to freedom cannot be walked by proxy. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been but perhaps never clearly seen. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances and the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a bustling merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built elaborate houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose prosperity was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his ornate front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed disdain. "What do you want, beggar?" the gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers." "I am traveling and seeking alms," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious contempt. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance. Clearly this was just another vagrant trying to take advantage of his master's household. "Be gone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere." The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate. But now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, When the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally, offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a sumptuous feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast, as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me, it is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own superficial judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, judge not by appearances, a rich heart may be under a poor coat. Here we discover how our fixation on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and hierarchies based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols, rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters. His wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely, based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we've been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us toward a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive a different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help, or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we're wearing rags or ceremonial robes, whether others treat us with respect or dismissal. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your original face is not born and does not die." This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant, regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the symbols of status, while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions. Each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant, whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast, prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. Let us continue on our journey with a story about discovering the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart. In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student approached his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an ancient maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing earnestly for years, yet lately questions had been arising that reached deeper than formal instruction. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the student gathered courage to voice what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to excel in studies, to accomplish things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest longing that had once driven his own seeking. After contemplative silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this admission. "Why did you desire their pride so intensely?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender recognition. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be secure and abundant. But the reason I desired this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something essential. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I, in turn, would feel I had sufficient reason to love and accept myself. I was seeking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be evidence of my worthiness even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my striving." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. "But then one day, I awakened to a revolutionary possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could bypass all external validation and simply learn to love and accept myself unconditionally? What if I didn't require anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence?" The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer circumstances, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as constant as my own heartbeat, independent of any external validation? The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never considered. And that realization began your quest for self-realization? Exactly, the master nodded. That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with discovering what was already complete within. After contemplative silence, the student asked, and did you never again desire their pride? Did that longing completely disappear? The master chuckled softly. Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Conditioned patterns don't vanish overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before. He gestured toward the darkening garden, where fireflies had begun their dance. I learned to see those approval-seeking thoughts as passing phenomena, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could observe them with interest and compassion, but I no longer gave them power to determine my worth. So you still cared what others thought? The student asked. I respected their opinions and honored their perspectives, the master replied. But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the determining factor in whether I felt at peace with myself. The master's face radiated quiet joy, and never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like discovering I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was revealed to have been within me all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with destructive thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the master's discovery. Most suffering stems from the mistaken belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through external achievements or approval. Here, we discover one of the most revolutionary insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural birthright to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy, not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, achievement, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance feels foreign. Our culture intensifies this conditioning by promoting the myth that happiness comes from external sources. Each message reinforces the delusion that we are incomplete as we are. Consider how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you modify authentic expression to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on external feedback rather than internal recognition of inherent value? When we love ourselves unconditionally, we create a foundation of fulfillment that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with gratitude rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without devastation, because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You, yourself, deserve your love and affection." This isn't narcissism. It's recognition of fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and witnesses your experiences is not improved or diminished by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear, like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the tenderness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a beloved child learning, or the same compassion you'd feel for a friend in difficulties. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for authentic transformation. In discovering this unconditional love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here, beating steadily in our own hearts. Tonight, as we draw this peaceful exploration to its natural end, can you notice how the tranquility you've discovered isn't something you've gained from outside yourself, but rather something you've simply remembered was always there? Can you feel that the deep calm you've encountered this evening doesn't belong to these tales alone, but rests quietly within your own being, patiently waiting for moments like these to reveal itself? The Buddha reminded us that health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the greatest relationship. In light of this wisdom, consider how the contentment you seek isn't found in accumulating experiences or achievements, but emerges naturally when you rest in the fullness of this present moment. Each story we've shared tonight has whispered the same essential truth. That struggle dissolves when we stop fighting what is. That genuine freedom comes not from controlling circumstances, but from releasing our need to control them. And that lasting contentment blooms when we see through the illusions that keep us restless. Even when thoughts arise, even when the mind wants to analyze or plan, the understanding you've cultivated tonight has already taken root in your consciousness, becoming a quiet source of strength you can return to whenever life feels overwhelming. Notice, as you settle into rest, that these timeless insights haven't pointed you towards some distant destination, but have gently guided you home to the richness of simply being here, now. In this settling moment, allow yourself to recognize how your perspective has softened, how naturally your body releases tension, and how effortlessly your mind finds its center, clear and undisturbed. These teachings remind us that profound understanding isn't locked away in ancient monasteries or hidden in complex philosophies. It lives in the beautiful ordinariness of conscious presence, in the breath you're breathing right now, in the awareness that notices these words, in the peace that needs no special conditions to exist. Tonight, you've touched that understanding directly, not through thinking about it, but through experiencing it fully. As you transition from this restful space back into the rhythm of your days, take with you not just the stories we've shared, but the deeper recognition they've awakened, that peace isn't something to achieve, but something to remember, not something to create, but something to uncover. May this recognition accompany you always, offering clarity in confusion and stillness in chaos. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.